look at some of the roots of IS. With us is Christoph Reuter, journalist for Der Spiegel, who authored the investigative report on the roots of the Islamic State. Mr. Reuter, thank you very much for being with us.
Good evening.
So we already know, and we discussed a lot about here in the studio, how the command of IS is very largely rooted actually in former Iraqi military brass, in Saddam Hussein's top military brass. But in this report, you sort of uncover that it was a much more methodological planning. What did you uncover in this report?
Many people know or understood that you have former Iraqi intelligence officers, army officers in the leadership of IS, but what consequences this had, this we found out when we discovered in northern Syria a trove of papers, handwritten maps, plans, very detailed strategy, how to subjugate Syria, how to conquer large parts of the country without a big force, but with brilliant planning, with infiltration, with secret kidnappings, with competing intelligence cells even on village level, to establish an order which is very resilient, very firm, and even to establish this order with a rather low number of actual fighters.
How far back do these documents go back, if we're to sort of guess when the actual planning, the building of the Islamic State began?
Well, the documents probably go back until 2012. We found draft versions for the intelligence apparatus, who should be in charge of what in the chain of command. Parts of these plans are basically copy-paste from what we know from Saddam Hussein's intelligence apparatus. But the interesting thing is parts of these plans were specifically designed for the anarchic situation you had in northern Syria in 2012-13, where there was no central power, but hundreds of local councils of rebel militias. So if you could infiltrate village by village by village without people knowing who you are first, you had a great chance of establishing your order before people would even notice who's behind it. And this was, I mean, the situation you had in Syria did not exist in Arab countries before. There you had normally a firm order, a dictatorship. So these Baathis not only were able to replicate the old system of Saddam Hussein, but to develop some new plans based basically on the knowledge and experience they had collected over 30 years in this business.
So not having the label of the Islamic State, which is now all over media around the world for some time, worked to their advantage in sort of building the empire, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you go through these papers, you find no Islamic references at all. It's a cold-blooded strategic plan for establishing power. It has nothing to do with Islam. Islam is used to attract the foreign fighters, which you just mentioned, from all over the world. And it is used to tell whoever wants to oppose their rule that, hey, you are an infidel because we are representing God.
That's
we
incredible.
are representing the Islamic State. So if you resist us, we have to kill you. We are very sorry. So it's an enormously powerful tool, but they just use this tool. They don't believe in it.
Christoph, I'm going to let Dr. Anata Ochberg-Marom, who's here in the studio, she'd like to ask you a question as well.
Good evening, Mr. Reuter. I would like to ask you regarding any hints backward to the history of the Islamic State. If you go backward to 2003 or 2004, what about any mastermind strategic plan that could be since then? I mean, a period of 10 years prior to this plan. Are there any hints?
Yes. To be honest, the greatest help and assistance to form the Islamic State and to win the most brilliant former Iraqi officers over to this were the first decrees of Paul Bremer to dissolve the former U.S. viceroy in Iraq in 2003, right. To dissolve the whole Iraqi army. So you had people who were not necessarily hardcore believers of Saddam, but suddenly they were jobless. They were jobless, they were angry, they went into resistance, and they were exactly those people which jihadi movements had not had before. Before, in Al-Qaeda, you had fanatics. You had people who would die for the belief, but would not know how to run a municipality, how to build a military structure to conquer some area. So suddenly you had these guys, and they were growing slowly through the ranks of what was first Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And in 2010, when US forces and Iraqi forces managed to capture or kill 80% of the leadership of the Islamic State, this was the golden hour for the former officers finally to take over the leadership.
Christoph, one last question. You mentioned a lot of developed planning about Syria, about what the Islamic State would do in Syria. As we know, the idea of the Islamic caliphate extends far beyond just Syria. In the documents that you got a chance to see, is there a much greater, a wider plan for an Islamic State that spans across the Middle East?
No, it's not like this. The plans describe a kind of ready-made concept how you can subjugate and conquer each and every country, basically. You could apply them in Libya, or they are already applied. You could apply them in parts of Egypt. Maybe you could apply at a certain moment parts of these plans in Saudi Arabia. But it was not about first we take Manhattan, then we take Berlin. It was about how do we get control over area A, B, C, D, E, and this can be extended until Indonesia.
Christoph Reuter, incredibly interesting. Of all the things we hear about the Islamic State, some of these things we have not heard. Thank you very, very much for taking the time to speak with us.